Undoubtedly, war crimes have been committed. A single civilian killed directly in military conflict is a war crime. We understand hundreds of Israelis have been killed by this illegal incursion into Israel. What we saw on Saturday was a massive incursion by the terror group Hamas into southern Israel. Really complex operation. Now, this is something far beyond any terror group that I've seen before. The coordination of paragliders, of missiles, and terrorists themselves, up to 1,000 troops, crossing in multiple places to preordained targets, probably pre-recce targets as well. From what we understand, have murdered thus far around 700 Israeli citizens and Israeli troops. The biggest attack on Israel for many, many years. Probably this has been a huge failure of the Israeli intelligence network, but that's something that the Israelis will have to look at in future. But it has the potential to destabilize not just Israel, but the whole of the Middle East. One doesn't quite know where Hamas, the terror group, has been trained. But when I look at the videos that they posted of their training, this is more akin to UK or US special forces. So some very sophisticated organization, a state organization, I suggest, has probably been training them in these skills. One can only guess at who it is. It smells of the Iranians, potentially also mercenary groups like Wagner. And the concern now is that it doesn't spread beyond Israel. But Israel now has a big task to bring the terror groups' activities to an end. Undoubtedly, war crimes have been committed. A single civilian killed directly in military conflict is a war crime. We understand hundreds of Israelis have been killed by this illegal incursion into Israel. There undoubtedly have been a lot of Palestinians killed. Now, it is going to be very, very difficult to work this out, exactly what is direct conflict and what is a war crime. But in 2023, with the amount of social media, the amount of intelligence assets around, organizations that deal with war crimes, the UN, etc., will be able to gather this intelligence, will be able to investigate it, and hopefully we'll be able to cut through the wheat and the chaff to work out who is responsible. But on the face of it, sadly, in every conflict, and we've seen it in spades in Ukraine, when civilians are killed, that is a war crime. And that is what the UN and the international community must call out and make sure that those responsible pay for their crimes. As far as we're aware, there's not a direct threat from Hamas to the UK as such, although we are aware that British citizens have been killed in the invasion in southern Israel, and there may well be British hostages in Gaza now. But not a direct threat to the UK, although there is still very much a threat from ISIS, although ISIS has been much written down in northern Iraq and elsewhere by US and UK and coalition activities. Well, we're now looking to the next phase of this war, and Israel has very much declared it as a war. It is clear that the Israeli Defense Force is now going to conduct operations in Gaza. There are potentially another 30,000 or so Hamas fighters, extremist fighters within Gaza. There are 100 plus hostages, and it's clear the Israeli intent is to get those hostages out where they can and also get the terrorists. However, the threats of Hamas to kill these terrorists is classic activity by these sort of terror groups, using civilians as human shields. It's what ISIS has done for many, many years, and Al-Qaeda as well. Terrorists, they're not brazenly brave people. They're phenomenally, potentially cowards. And if they think they can use these hostages to try and stem the Israeli attack. But that is going to be a huge consideration. We now know there is a huge armored force, reported earlier today, over 50, maybe up to 100 Israeli tanks and armored personnel carriers and artillery and bulldozers getting ready to go into Gaza. Now, urban operations and urban warfare is the most difficult operation military forces can undertake because of the civilians issue, the civilians around the collateral damage. And that is going to be a huge concern, that as the Israeli Defense Force goes into Gaza, civilians are going to be put in the way of the tanks. And it's going to be a very slow and deliberate process, I expect, because I'm sure the Israelis want to minimize civilian casualties as much as everybody else. But it's highly likely that Hamas will actually try and hide behind these casualties and get as much propaganda as they can out of every hostage that is killed. Now, whether they're killed by Hamas themselves, and Hamas have already killed over 900 people, who knows? And it's going to be very difficult. But that is the challenge. And Israeli forces are some of the best trained urban fighters in the world, and they will prosecute this operation. Very sadly, however careful they are, and careful and war fighting is not two words that fit together neatly, there are going to be civilian casualties, and no doubt there will be a lot of Hamas casualties, and sadly, a lot of Israeli soldier casualties as well. This is going to take some time. They will move in with their infantry on the ground, supported by tanks, and I expect they will literally go through every town and village and building to track down these Hamas fighters. Israel will overwhelm Gaza with military capability and firepower, and they will try and get out those Hamas fighters as they can. But it is going to take time. That is for certain. The big concern is that the war doesn't spread elsewhere. The possibility to spread is definitely there. We have learned a lot. We in the West, that is, I think, have learned a lot from our pedestrian involvement in the Ukraine war, our lack of involvement in the Syrian conflict, when the Obama Red Line and chemical weapons were used to kill thousands of people. And it strikes me that the US have acted decisively by pushing a fleet with the largest aircraft carrier in the world to the region to try and show the intent that US will not allow this to spread further. So I think that is a good move. I think it's also the fact that most of the democratic free world are stating this is a heinous crime committed by Hamas and will not be allowed to sit. So one is expecting that people like Iran and Hezbollah realize that if they get involved, they're going to get slammed, and they don't want that. The Russians are really hoping that everybody focuses on Israel as they desperately try and cling on to Crimea. So at the moment, I think it is unlikely that it will spread beyond Gaza and Israel, but that's always a possibility. In a perfect world, the Hamas terrorists would be eliminated or arrested, and peace would ensue. Unfortunately, this is war fighting. War fighting is dangerous, and lots of people get caught up in it. We've already seen many buildings in Gaza razed to the ground. Unfortunately, no doubt there will be a lot more. And when the street fighting gets on with the tanks and the infantry against terrorists, there will be more damage, without a shadow of a doubt. The conflict in this part of the world, in Israel and Gaza, is not going to end for a very long time. The most immediate conflict, the urban fight around Gaza, will end when the Israelis are satisfied that the Hamas direct terror threat to Israel is nullified, and nullified for a period of time. That may take weeks, that may take a bit less. But once that's happened, it is then time to get back to the political and diplomatic tables, and to get those vast majority of Palestinians in Gaza watered, fed, and back to some sort of normal type of life. But there's going to be some really dark days, I expect, between now and when that happens.